Hello, daydreamers. My name is Hamza.
I'm Chandler, and welcome to Daydreaming Duality. What are we talking about today, Hamza?
Today we're talking about red giraffes.
No, we're not. But I
uh,
suppose we are. What's going on?
so yeah, to be more accurate, today we'll be talking about the age-old technique of hypnosis. So to get the ball rolling on the discussion, Chandler, what are your views on hypnosis? Because it's very hotly debated, even from a scientific point of view.
It is. There are papers that show that more or less the effectiveness of hypnosis relies very heavily on the willingness of the participant to engage in it. So, my perspective is that it is a very, very strong assisted placebo effect, if I can phrase it that way.
Ooh,
Um,
okay,
but
okay.
but it's meditative in nature, so it is extraordinarily effective when used therapeutically between a person who voluntarily would like to undergo it and a therapist who knows how to utilize it. I have seen papers that support that it is effective under those constraints.
Yeah, so I know you said there that it is meditative in nature, but through my research today, which was watching a bunch of BBC documentaries, to be honest, um,
Great. All right.
because BBC, they're accurate enough. Uh, and anyway, yeah, so through my research, I kind of came across like there's essentially two types of hypnosis, or like how it can be initiated in a sense, or how it can be processed.
Perfect.
The
Okay.
the first one the one you described is the meditative, where it's like you stare into a clock, and or like when pocket watch that swings back and forth, and like the hypnosis is like you're falling asleep. So, but that,
Well, it doesn't have to be that you're falling asleep, really. I
well,
mean, that's the trope, right? But the game
yeah.
is you want to get the focus of the individual who is participating, and you want to keep that heightened state of focus,
Mm-hmm.
but you want it to be done in a calm way. So that trope, it works, I guess, for some, but it's a matter of suggestion.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like the most more meditative angle to hypnosis. But what I came across was another form of hypnosis where you abruptly break that logical train of thought that we're all continuously running through our heads 24/7, and you can also induce that trance like that hypnotic state by abruptly breaking their thoughts. The wall outside my house is no more than 4 foot tall. So just so it's essentially a form of so that phrase you just heard me say. You might have been
Hmm.
like, "Huh? What is he talking about?" Right?
Oh, I
Uh,
did have a moment of that, yeah.
yeah. So that's another way to induce a hypnotic state. It's like uh, so what I came across essentially is that these two methods, what they attempt to do is they take that regular pattern of your train of thought, because there is a definite flow to it, right? And
Okay.
essentially, what you're trying to do is either you're trying to focus that flow into a specific thought, or you're trying to altogether disrupt it and start a new flow. So that's what I came across. These two ways you can achieve hypnosis or a trance-like state on a person, or induce it, I suppose.
Sure, but I think you'll find that in both cases, and I just want to make this disclaimer relatively clear, in both cases, for that to be effective and therapeutically applicable, the participant has to at least be willing and open to the idea. I think you'll find that the most you'll get out of other people are moments of brief contemplation and perhaps some strange looks if they have no interest whatsoever in the process and no desire to participate.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. So, hypnosis does rely on a person's how willing they are to participate in the act, because and that's another hot topic of debate in the scientific community. Is it an act at the end of the day, like where uh, the participant is just going along with it? Because we are
So
very
for
so
stage shows, sure. For
yeah,
stage shows, absolutely.
but I think an argument could also be made that even the fact that they're going along with it in the first place highlights some form of hypnosis.
I've seen that argument before, and the refutation that I've seen to that has a lot to do with one's perceived social responsibility to assist someone they believe to be an authority in establishing the veracity of their claims. And so
Uh,
it's more a social psychological construct than it is a um, how should I say, a hypnotic concept. And
yeah,
Ariel pipes in with that feels unfalsifiable, which is a very important kind of distinction to make. When
yeah,
we dive into the world of psychology, we want to be really scientific. And one of the principles of scientific analysis is developing falsifiable theories so that we can actually put them to the test. If they are unfalsifiable, they produce almost nothing of scientific value.
yeah, and that's one of the key issues with the whole, study around hypnosis. Is like there's only so far we can, induct things as far as thoughts go on it. But
Right. And you're
uh,
right to call it induction. That's very important.
yeah, and it's really fun stuff. Gantum said blue elephant, and I think that broke my train of thoughts.
Uh-oh. Don't be too suggestible now. We want to make sure that no one thinks about red giraffes. It's very important that they
Very
leave that
important.
at the door.
Yeah, Eris Ariel comes in with it also depends on which kind of hypnosis you're talking about. Hypnotherapy is more like guided meditation. Hypnosis, in the magical sense, doesn't happen. And that's correct. But one thing I do want to highlight is that, so you're right, there are two forms of hypnosis. There's a clinical version of it, which is hypnotherapy. It's a real thing, and some people do find benefits in it. And then there's hypnosis you see on a stage in Vegas or something. And I think one of the more important things about it is that while there are more theatrics involved with on stage hypnosis, I think the underlying principles are very similar.
I don't know about that. I would call that into question personally. The under when you say let me actually do that. I said I would call that into question. Let me actually do that. When you say underlying principles, specifically, what principles are you highlighting?
So kind of like peering into that suggestive nature of a person and making them do things. Uh, and I guess this goes back to my earlier claim that uh, if people are willingly doing it, not necessarily in a trance-like state, uh, is it still hypnosis? And so,
We do have to answer that question to examine the truth of the assertion you made later.
so I would say yeah. Uh, it is I don't know. It might be a very subjective thing, but
I'm inclined to disagree because we want objectivity in a scientific system, right? So if we're going to make the definition of hypnosis require that trance-like state, and if that trance-like state is measurable using monitoring
it's
equipment of
okay.
any kind,
So the
then
trance-like state.
we have to stick to it.
All right. So funny enough, well, I doing a bit of digging on this trance-like state as well. Scientists cannot legitimately agree on whether it's a real thing or not. Some studies claim that yes, your brain reflects that trance-like state in the readings, and then what in the EKGs. Is it EKG? The brain reader.
Oh, geez. I always get EKG and EEG mixed up. I have to look it up. EKG is for the heart. EEG is for the brain.
EEG. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, some scientists say that hey, EEGs show that yes, trance-like state does look different in values compared to a regular state, and then there are others where like oh no, that's just normal everyday thing. You cannot pick and choose sections which look like trance-like state to justify, and so it's an ongoing debate. We're not even sure if this trance-like state exists.
Well, then we have to suspend the scientific discussion on the trance-like element of hypnosis to some extent, don't we? We want to insist that that's a defining component. Now, actually, Actually, I take that back. If we want to insist that that is a defining component, because it is very, very commonly associated with it in or out of the literature, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If we want to insist that that is part of it, then what we ultimately have to do is we have to set that as one of its testable criteria. If we cannot measure such a state, then the state cannot be said to have sort of scientific grounding, right?
Yeah,
If we
definitely.
suppose that there is a state and we suppose that there are patterns which should follow from that state, and those patterns are demonstrably not present, then we have demonstrated that that pattern does not hold. We can go back and work through it. This is one of the useful elements of the way that we approach things in science, isn't it?
Ah, you just throw stuff on the wall, whatever sticks, you write it down and call it science.
Oh man, you and Freud would get along so well.
Yeah. So I, I guess I do have like a hard and fast and loose way of science. But don't do that, folks. Aristotle says, but what exactly is a trance-like state? There are so many cat- uh,
Catatonia.
catatonia. Wow, that kind of tripped me up. Flat effects, etc.
That
So
affect. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it really seems like the trance-like state is essentially. So let's break down what it is from a perspective of a person inducing the hypnosis. I feel like that gives some picture of what a trance-like state might be, right? So let's suppose I'm putting in a trance-like state channeler. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. I was trying to think of an example where you can be like, oh, do this. But no, if I'm putting in a trance-like state channeler, right? Uh, I think to me, if you were to look, calm, if you were to look relaxed, if you were to look peaceful when I told you that, hey, you're falling asleep, kind of deal, right? Um, I would assume at that point, like, okay, this person is very suggestible, highly suggestible. He's taking what I'm saying and running with it, right? And so, from my point of view as a hypnosis, I would call that a trance-like state where you enter this period where you're highly suggestible to what I say.
Interesting. Okay. Let's run with this a little bit further before I
Yeah, yeah,
start to poke at it.
sure. Um, are you running with it, or am I running with it?
Oh yeah, no, please continue. We're calling your. Let me make sure. Let me summarize really quickly.
Yeah,
The
sure.
the uh the assumption that you're making for the detectability of a trance-like state is the appearance that someone has followed your directions.
Yes, very much so. Uh, I feel like that's that's essentially a bar to hypnosis. I would say. Um,
But Hamza, a parent instructing a child to go clean their room, whether or not the child complies in a happy mood or not, is hardly approaching what we would consider something that is hypnotherapy.
oh no,
The child has
definitely.
complied with the suggestion from the parents, however emphatic, that they should clean their room, right?
But at the end of the day, did it work?
So that's not a reasonable. How do I dismantle this? Because this to me is a very very unreasonable approach to a scientific concept.
Okay, pick it apart,
Did it
Chandler.
work is a great engineering approach to a scientific concept. But if a car drove across a bridge that I engineered,
Uh
and
huh.
it drove across the bridge that I engineered because the car had um, removed all of the seats except the driver's seat and quite a bit of excess material from the safety features of the vehicle in order to lose enough mass that it would not cause structural damage to my bridge. The bridge worked for that car. Does
And
that mean
it's
that the bridge is now ready for 18 wheelers?
and it's beautiful.
Should we go ahead and send a fuel liner across it? See how it goes?
I think it really boils down to how high this bridge is.
Oh no. This is destructive and dangerous.
But no, you're right. You're right. So there have to be more criterias. But I think I wasn't. So I wasn't taking exactly a scientific approach to the idea of that trance-like state, but more of a what do we see if once we induce someone into that trance-like state, and what you do see is that they're highly susceptible to whatever you say following that state. And it's a quick way to also figure out whether that person would be susceptible in the first place or not to your suggestions. Um, Someone who hypnosis does not work on will look wide awake and will not enter that, that trance-like state just out of sheer rebelliousness. And you'd know.
That's not necessarily rebellion, though, Hamza. I have to interrupt you again because this point is also on tenuous ground. It could be that the individual is experiencing a severe episode of anxiety, or is undergoing a panic attack, or is otherwise hypervigilant. Like there are other psychological, because we're talking about something like hypnotherapy, which is in the realm of a therapeutic treatment to psychological disorder, right? We have to remember there are areas of psychology which would defy that initial expectation, and we shouldn't take that, if we're going to approach it as a hypnotherapist would, we shouldn't take that as a read on their suggestibility necessarily, but a read on their current state. And their current state may not be amenable to it, but that doesn't make a statement about the person in general or their general psychological well-being or how you should handle that. In fact, there are, not that I'm trained. I'm certainly not trained, and I don't want to pretend to be by any stretch of the imagination because it's a lot more involved than I can easily convey. Um, the idea then would be, if an individual isn't responding to your suggestion that they should relax in your scenario, then other action ought to be taken to help them find calm and find peace and find relaxation before hypnotherapy starts,
Got it.
because
Chloroform.
that is a precondition to the beginning of the therapy, not a measure of their suggestibility.
I don't know if you heard me, but I said, got it. Chloroform it is.
No, 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 Hamza, no.
um,
No, Hamza.
it's funny. My parents wanted me to be a doctor, and I'm kind of glad I'm not.
Yeah, no, that would be a dangerous statement to make if you were hoping to be a medical practitioner one day.
Oh no,
Yeah, my
no.
solution to an anxious patient undergoing hypnotherapy is chloroform. Even said jokingly online might be grounds for review
Oh
of your
yeah.
of your license.
Oh yeah. If you're listening and you're ready to like cancel my medical license, just know that I'm not a medical professional.
And that you have no aspirations of becoming one at the time of this podcast. Um,
Debatable, but okay.
okay, I don't mean to laugh at your ambitions. If you want to change gears and go into the medical profession, by all means. But certain things about your approach will probably have to change along the way.
It's
Um,
it's this is how medical progresses. The medical field,
this is how medicine progresses.
The,
Oh no!
some people, you always have these crazy doctors that come out of the left field, and they're like,
Yeah, we call them quacks,
I think, they challenge the status quo,
and then
and
they get kicked out of the country.
but hey, they're successful in that third world country, so it works out. Um,
Hamza.
Harris Ariel comes in with psychology is a difficult subject to have scientific discussion with in some ways. Most things have a lot to do with trusting the patient and the patient trusting the researcher or a clinician. And you can't tell for certain if a person is in a trance-like state necessarily, unless you're watching brain scans at the exact time you caught. Excuse me. At the exact time you caught them zoning out.
In
And
which case, you'd be looking for the presence of theta and alpha waves, specifically, depending on the type, right?
oh, speaking of brain scans, that actually reminds me. This BBC documentary, right? This professor was running brain scans on people under this trance-like state, under this hypnosis, and he would show them a grayscale image, no hypnosis performed yet, and he'd ask them to imagine colors on that grayscale image, right? And they'd try, but it's and they'll take the reading of the brain scans, and then he would move on, and he'd after inducing the hypnosis, he'd ask them again, like, hey, okay, look at these images and imagine there are colors in there. And it was really interesting. Now, I can't speak to the validity of it because it was just a documentary I saw, not the actual paper. But from what he saw, uh, without hypnosis, the part that's responsible for the imagination lit up in the brain, right? But under hypnosis, the part that was responsible for vision and colors in the back of our brains is the part that lit up. And so the assumption out of that was that maybe people are actually seeing colors under hypnosis. And I thought that was really cool.
There is measurable activity in the posterior parts of the brain during meditation, for instance, usually an increase of alpha waves signaling a sort of relaxed and how should I call it, restful state, or
Mm-hmm.
it's indicative of that anyway. Now you may recall that your dreams have visual elements to them.
Oh, yeah, and they're wild.
So it's not I don't think it's too much of a stretch, and I like to call out stretches when I see them, so call it out if you think it's one that I'm giving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's too much of a stretch to suggest that if you have entered into the sort of wakeful, should I call it wakeful restness? Wake restful awareness. How should I
Restful,
call that?
restful wakeness.
Sure, let's call it restful wakeness. It seems a little strange to call it that, and I think there's probably a way to say it, and I just don't know what it
A
is.
trance-like state.
A trance-like state, wakeful rest. I don't know, one of those, right? So supposing they've entered into this appropriate state, and they're experiencing sort of increased alpha wave activity in the posterior parts of the brain, and they've got, towards the frontal and middle parts of the brain, they've got an increase in theta wave measurement and so on and so forth that would be associated with that type of relaxation. It wouldn't be alien to me to suggest that they are experiencing a form of daydreaming, and that this daydreaming frees them to imagine and perceive. But I, hmm.
I just heard the YouTuber Cinema Sins in the back of my mind go, roll credits.
Right, he said daydream. That's the buzzword in the show.
Ariel comes in with, again, I would imagine a person could pretend to be in a trance-like state by altering their breathing and calming themselves too. A meditative state or a calm state could potentially be considered a trance-like state, but depending on the person and that person's feeling in the moment, hypnosis, therapy, or stage play, you may not really get them to listen. I know it was mentioned already, but the suggestibility of people is interesting and is something you don't need hypnosis to utilize. And
That's true.
I would agree with
Marketing
that.
does it all the time, right? We've got tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of social psychological research backing up different marketing approaches.
Oh,
That
dude.
is playing at suggestibility. It's not hypnosis,
Oh,
but it
no.
is playing at suggestion.
No, yeah. And you know, so there's another thing I just thought of, and I
It
found it.
wasn't a red giraffe, was it?
Uh, no, it wasn't. You had mentioned earlier at the start of the episode, placebos, and that's something we're still trying to figure out of like how strong can a placebo be. Uh, so again, I'm gonna reference back to this BBC documentary. I watched a couple back to back today to brush up on my hypnosis. But yeah, so in the documentary, there was a doctor, an anesthesiologist, right? I guess he is also a
Okay.
doctor, and they had a patient come in with severe warts on their skin, right? Now,
Hmm.
I don't know if you're aware, but you can actually do a bit of placebo. Tell a person that your wart will go away or fall off or something, and for some reason, warts can go away with a placebo. And it's
Um,
so
Interesting.
I've yeah no I've not verified this. Well, guys, if you're listening to this, just know that uh I blame BBC. Um,
Well, you're clearly citing your source. So if anyone is misled by the information you've provided, they know where to look for the original claim and how to pursue any appropriate action against those claiming scientific authority in that area. We are amateurs on the internet talking about things that we've Googled
And find interesting.
or find interesting or have watched BBC documentaries on or you know, spent a little bit of time reading the literature on, and that sort of small things. We're not professionals in this domain.
Okay, yeah. So going back to that story about this anesthesiologist and the power
Sure.
of suggestion, right? So one day they had a patient come in, and the main doctor was like, "Oh yeah, no, there's nothing we can do about it," right? And the anesthesiologist was like, "Hey, yo, can't we use the power of suggestion and make the ward go away?" And so the doctor was like, well, why don't you do it? Because the doctor knew it was incurable. Like, there's no placebo that could fix that. And so the anesthesiologist went on to say, like, oh, it'll clear up in a week or two's time. And he sent the patient away. And lo and behold, the patient comes back in a week or two's time, and the wart is cleared up. Uh, Now, here's where things kind of get fishy, even to me. Uh, I'm not usually too skeptical of things and highly suggestible, but even I was like, okay. But apparently, this wart wasn't really a wart. It was actually a form of skin disease where you develop like an eczema kind of skin all over your body, right? Uh,
Okay, so it's synced to the immune system, which is responsive to stress.
yeah, and yeah, the whole thing cleared up. Now, the thing about this skin disease that this person has is that it was truly incurable. Like, there is no known cure for the skin disease. But somehow, through a placebo, through such a stability, it was gone. And, you know, the anesthesiologist was just as shocked when he realized that, oh, it was not curable. And he goes on to say that once he discovered it was not curable, and he's actually done like the biggest placebo miracle of all time. Uh, he tried replicating his success, but he never could. And he said that the fact that he couldn't do it again was because he knew deep down inside that it is not curable, and what he's prescribing is a placebo that won't work. So he lost faith in his own thing. And apparently, the person he did it to uh, chose to remain anonymous after this ordeal. Uh, and yeah, so curing incurable skin diseases using the power of placebo.
So it's difficult, right? Because
Yeah,
placebo is by the easiest description a sort of mind over matter scenario in
and it's
colloquial
and it's a
terms.
very slippery slope.
It is a very slippery slope, and the line between what is genuine result and what is coincidence is very, very hard to trace. So it's a very, very blurry area. And I said earlier that falsifiability is one of the really, really big things that we care about. The
Yeah,
good news is placebo can be falsified in a few different cases. For instance, take an amputee and tell them their arm will grow back in a couple of weeks, no matter how strong your delivery, no matter how much hypnosis you use, no matter how much willpower you provide the individual artificially, they will not regrow a limb on a whim, so to speak, because our biology doesn't permit it. This is, in essence, the falsifiability of the universality of placebo, right? So the question is, can we continue to falsify aspects of it to limit its range to particular functions, and can we trace the mechanisms by which those functions work, hypothesize about them, and then test those too? I think that is something we can do. I don't know how far we can get doing it.
so
And
yeah, so that ward example was not the only example I stumbled upon. There's actually a couple
sure,
of surgical placebos. I don't know if you're familiar with that idea. uh
the idea that someone might be told that they're going to undergo some kind of particular surgery, they get put to sleep as though they would, then that no surgery is actually fully performed. Perhaps an initial incision is made so that it
mm-hmm.
has the appearance of the surgery, but no actual invasive work is done. I've heard of the concept, and I've heard that in some cases it has been a reasonable approach, but I don't know the specifics, and I don't know the genuine efficacy of it overall compared to the actual surgeries. I'd imagine that the actual surgeries for solving known problems is probably a significantly better choice.
Yeah, and so again, referencing back to this hot BBC documentary I saw.
I
Uh,
love hot BBC documentaries. This has got to be one of the best ones we've referenced up to this point.
yeah. So this example that they displayed, it seemed a lot more credible than the word story that they told. But essentially, the doctor, he ran a controlled where he actually did the surgery, right? There was actually two controls he did. Like there were, it was a knee surgery to be specific, and those two controls had like different sorts of surgery performed. Where one was cleaning and one was just something. I'm not a surgeon by any means. Uh, and then there was a third group where they were dealt the placebo surgery, and it didn't work for everybody, obviously. No shocker. But for for a couple people, they never actually ended up. They didn't need an actual surgery afterwards. Um, they truly felt that their pain, their ailment that was caused in their knee, was gone. Even after finding out that it was a placebo, they still were conveyed that whatever was wrong is fixed.
Well, some things can go into remission. So the skin disease that you described earlier, if it was truly eczema-like, is definitely something that is caused by inflammation, and that inflammation is triggered as part of an immune response.
Yeah.
The immune system is very responsive to stress, and so if you have lowered someone's stress levels with assurances that something is going to dissipate, and the problem that they're having is a result of stress exacerbating it, then, and I'm using words that Aristotle has used as
Mm-hmm.
well, she
Mm-hmm.
says, likely that the disease is still there, but that is not being exacerbated by the stress. It's exactly the right idea. Because the stress is not present, the immune system is not as um, active for that and other reasons, perhaps. And so the symptoms of the immune system's activity have receded. Now, um, there are many other things like this. Eczema is not the only thing that would respond this way. Alopecia could respond this way. And I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
medical professional, but alopecia is again caused usually by the immune system acting out of hand. And that can be exacerbated and brought about by high levels of stress over a prolonged period of time. Other things that the immune system causes can also see changes in this way. Things like allergies and nasal polyps, and you could imagine that
Oh,
someone going in for a sinus
sorry,
cleaning.
Chandler.
Go ahead.
You have seemed to cut off. We've all seemed to cut off.
Have we? Are we here?
Hello.
Hello? This is not a good sign.
Okay, Air Serial says what? Yes. Uh, so okay, never mind.
What happened?
Oh,
Are we good?
yeah, I think we're good because so my mixer just decided that it's not gonna show me the audio levels anymore. So
Oh,
no more audio mixing on the fly.
okay. Well,
So
we're just gonna hope that the current levels are good enough, right?
guys in the chat, give us two thumbs up if you could still hear us.
Can they do thumbs up in the chat? Is that an emoji that they have access to?
Uh, yeah.
I've never used the emoji system on Twitch.
And by the way, folks, if you're listening on Spotify, if you're listening on YouTube, uh, join us live, and you too can send emojis our way while we're doing uh our talks. Oh, my
If indeed the emoji system functions.
there I don't see a thumbs up.
We got two thumbs up from Arisariel, but the two thumbs up that we got were in hyphen. They weren't emojis. Now I did scroll through the list of emojis and I didn't find a thumbs up list or a thumbs
No.
up symbol either. I could just be blind though.
Yeah.
There's a tentacle in there. Squid 4, I think it is. No idea what that's about.
See, our goal should be to get a red giraffe in there.
A red giraffe. We- One of these days, all sorts of branding surrounding red giraffes. Yeah, yeah, look, we got 3 tentacles, so we must be doing fine.
God, I wish that was the level of approval I can get. It's like
Hamza, you
people,
have 3 tentacles. You're doing great.
like just in everyday life, people just throw tentacles at you instead of thumbs up.
Man, in a world where squid and octopus was that universally consumed.
Uh, sorry, I interrupted your train of thoughts there.
That's okay. That's kind of demonstrative of the point, isn't it? Disrupting logical pathways, the second type of hypnosis you referenced.
Yes. So
So what will you suggest that I will follow?
okay, so going back to that disruptive methodology of hypnosis, right? It's pretty
Uh-huh.
similar in concept to if someone's coming to fight you, you can strip naked, and they'll be too weirded out to fight you.
Is that true? Can you do that? Does that work?
So
It is a subversion of expectation.
it's
It could lead to comedy.
so yeah. I mean I would not suggest it, but like if you're out of options and the other guy is into total psycho, you might get away with it. Like,
Technically, you might get arrested for indecent exposure, but
you know,
can you no, hold on.
you
I've got
take
a
the
real
highs with the
question, Hamza.
lows.
This is the most important question I've ever asked on the show.
Okay.
Can you use
Mm-hmm.
castle doctrine or stand your ground as justification for indecent exposure in self-defense?
Honestly, man, I feel like if it's a scenario where you have an aggressor, and preferably you're not within a mile of an elementary school, I think you'll be fine.
You're at least a mile away from the nearest elementary school. Oh no. Oh no, now we've added the concept of indecent exposure to a minor into the mix. So clearly it cannot be indecent exposure to a minor. It has to be indecent exposure exclusively to adults.
Mm-hmm.
Um Anywhere that stand your ground or castle doctrine applies. Now we need a lawyer to answer this question.
All right.
I'm not a legal
So I
expert.
mean,
You're not a legal expert.
I'm not, but I would state that if you're using the castle doctrine or standing your ground doctrine, first of all, castle doctrine, I believe that only applies on your property, right?
Sure, it's also subsumed by stand your ground.
Yeah.
Castle doctrine's sort of a weaker version of it.
So I mean, no one's. I mean, people are gonna look at you funny, but you can technically walk out into your yard butt naked.
Can you?
I mean, I don't think people are gonna immediately call the cops.
You don't know. You don't know who the neighbors are.
I'm hoping they're
You
pretty
could
cool.
have that one neighbor who's been standing at the kitchen blinds all week waiting for someone to break a rule so that they can dial the police.
Oh, HOA.
So we
Uh,
have from Rosario, I don't believe you can in Florida. I think in some states, if people can see you through the window, you might even get in trouble. Now, I was under the impression that that was the case in Texas, and in other states as well. So Florida and Texas, I think, agree on that point. I don't know what other states would be looped in, maybe Louisiana. That indecent exposure to the public is grounds for a charge to indecent exposure, unless it could be proven that reasonable precaution was taken that public exposure could not happen. I don't know the veracity of that. And again, I'm not a legal expert, but it just struck me as a really funny question to ask in a situation where your life was threatened. If getting naked saved you, and then were about to receive an indecent exposure charge because of some follow up of that event, could you invoke similar legal precedent as Castle Doctrine to defend your streaking, uh,
so so so
essentially, which is what that would be,
so
right? Because
so I mean,
ultimately,
I just realized something, Chandler. I think this technique would work perfectly against you, because you'll be too busy thinking about the legalities of stripping naked in front of another person. So, um,
I might still, get jumped. So, like, what good would that do me? I wouldn't instinctively tear my clothes off at
oh
the
no no
presence of
no
an aggressor.
no. I said if you were jumping someone and they stripped naked, I think that would stop you in your track.
Well, I mean, here we are in a plain hypothetical scenario.
Of
Now,
course, totally
ideally, I would
hypothetical.
never ever be in a position where I'm needing to jump someone because
No,
that sort of
no,
scenario is a nightmare, right?
that is no,
It
we're
doesn't
not.
it's just a bad idea. It's against the law, it causes harm. It's just not a good thing to do. Um
Yes, folks. Just for the people who are listening to this, Ariel defends us and says, "Neither of you would jump someone. Let that be known, and known it is." No,
Goodness gracious. But
we're
in a
past this.
situation where we're asking the question, should one of us be driven to such depravity as to consider and potentially actually engage in something as heinous as jumping someone? Would we be affected by someone
Oh
stripping
yeah,
naked?
totally, dude. I would start walking the other way immediately.
Yeah,
Like
I could see that, right? Like,
like
because you
I'm
could think about it. Think about the follow through for that, right? Some dude catches this on film and it goes all over the internet. You are seen stabbing a naked man in the middle of the street.
no, I think it's actually worse. If someone is crazy enough uh to strip naked in the middle of a fight, you don't know how much crazier could they be? They just strip naked in the middle of a fight, you know?
They have a level of crazy that is surpassed your own.
Yeah. Uh,
when you're doing your necessary social dice rolls in your head, you go, well, mine caps out at about 15, but theirs clearly goes to like 50 something. So
it's a horrifying
goodness.
realization. Oh yeah, so I guess at the end of the day, either it'll work perfectly, or it'll just make the whole situation way worse than it needs to be.
I like that. We have an episode on hypnosis, but the bottom line is we're considering the viability of stripping naked to stop a fight. So let's take a look at the time here and notice that we have about, should I say, just over 15 minutes left in today's show. And it's probably a great time, if you have a question, to begin to formulate and post it so that we have time to answer it. Likewise, if you have good suggestions for us for topics to cover in the future, or you want to see what crazy tangents we can spawn from a perfectly sane conversation topic, by all means, stick that in the suggestion box and we'll take it under consideration.
Ariel says a distracted conversation about distracting someone.
We would
LOL.
never talk about red giraffes on this show.
No, never. Don't even think about a red giraffe. I know you got it. uh, but yeah. So this whole conversation, I guess I should it's time for like the background of how this conversation came to be. Uh, we were talking about Inception. After last week's episode, because we kind of went on a movie tangent, or I guess I went on a
Yeah.
movie tangent. Uh,
I'll take some blame for that. We really kind of dug even deeper into the Matrix after we stopped the episode for a few minutes there, and we started talking about related concepts and philosophical background and so on and so forth.
yeah. So
Um,
if you like The Matrix, do check out episode 12. But this episode kind of spun off from the idea of Inception and how we should not talk about movies consistently on our podcast. But movies are a great gateway to figuring out uh, general concepts that we kind of gloss over in our everyday life.
Hamza, we've got a question.
Uh-huh.
Comes from Ariel. Says, here's my question. Would you go along with a hypnotist if they chose you in a crowd, unlikely as it would be? And if so, why? They have follow-ups to that, but I should ask you that one first.
I honestly can't say. So, personality wise, I love stringing the crowd along, and if and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that if I felt like my participation would continue to string that crowd along, I might go into it.
Okay, that plays into the first part of the question, or the first part of the follow-up, which was, would you do it because you're afraid of letting the crowd down, or would you do it because you want to act? Kind of, you chose a middle road to that, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I didn't even
Uh,
read that part. Yeah.
there is the stringing the crowd along is sort of a combination of not letting the crowd down because it keeps up the esteem of the show, and it's an opportunity to act. And your tenacity for wanting to put on a good show, I think, would incur that kind of action. The following is there another reason you might, and if not, why? Um, if I were chosen as a volunteer for a hypnotist show, that would first have put me in a place where I would be observing a show, where a hypnotist is performing. So if I were answering the question directly by avoiding the question, I know that's a contradiction. I would say probably not because I don't think that I would pay for a ticket to go and watch a hypnotist. But supposing we don't dismiss the question, we actually arrive. If I were in a show and I were selected as a member of the audience to come up and participate in the act, and I did go up on stage, my internal theater nerd would probably have me participate to some limited extent, so as to not break the laws of improv, right?
Yeah, I mean, you want to give the people what they want, and they came to watch someone get hypnotized. Darn
Yeah,
it.
that's exactly right. Uh, Ariel follows up with another question. Would you ever consider trying hypnotherapy in good faith, or do you think your potential skepticism would make it difficult?
So to answer that question, so doing a bit of research I did on hypnotherapy itself, um, it's not a one session kind of thing at all. It's not something you just try in a sense, right? If you commit to hypnotherapy, you really, and it is highly recommended by the professionals that if you commit to it, at least 4 to 6 sessions before you call it quits on it. So I feel like the fact that there is a commitment involved, uh, I think a lot of people might find it to work just in the sense that they willed themselves to make it work.
And the question, Hamza, isn't whether or not people would. The question is whether you would consider trying hypnotherapy in good faith.
And I guess I answered that from an angle that yes, if I were to try it, I wouldn't just try it. I'd actually go through that full experience of like whatever the course is. Like it's gonna take 6 sessions or 10 sessions, and I'd stick around through the whole ordeal. Now, would I find it difficult? I think the first few sessions, I would be quite skeptical, especially in a clinical setting. It's like, oh, hypnosis, wow. But I think if it's a decent person, I would say that they might be able to get over my skepticism and break it down and actually make it work.
So So that's obviously like built into the assumption for the question, right? We by assuming that you're willing to undergo the hypnotherapy, there's sort of an assumption that you trust the clinician and that you trust the process and that you trust the environment
Yeah, yeah,
and that you're open to suggestion and all of the other requirements for hypnotherapy have to have been satisfied for it to be a good faith attempt, right? Um, for me, I. Hmm. I would consider it under certain
if
circumstances.
I was your
Supposing,
hypnotherapist.
Hamza, if you were my hypnotherapist, there's no chance in hell I'd be willing to undergo it in good faith. Um, I appreciate you offering your services,
Of
and
course.
I hope that you find the clientele that you can assist. But between you and me, I think that if I needed to go and seek counseling, I'd probably prefer to seek it from an individual who's studied it and been trained in it and is licensed to perform it. Um, and under those assumptions, it would probably be made difficult because I would be very aware of what's going on. That said, I've also done meditation. And I've practiced meditation and I've practiced mindfulness in different settings. So I understand that open mindedness and willingness to see change can lead to change, and that change is psychological change. And so, in a setting where I needed that therapy to overcome a psychological hurdle and other methods were not working for me, I would understand the efficacy of it and potentially be able to overcome the initial difficulty.
Yeah, and I think That's kind of like the whole point to it, and it's wow, where we got 10 minutes left, folks. And this is crazy because I didn't even get to MK Ultra in this episode.
Is that where you were going?
Yeah.
Hard pause. Let's see what the comments say real quick.
uh, Air Serial comes in with, to clarify, some people can override their skepticism, and some people have a difficult time doing so, even during the first session. Since hypnotherapy, to oversimplify, guided meditation, a very suggestible person might be able to do it in the first try. A skeptical person might be able to do it in the first try, but someone like me might have trouble relinquishing control. And that is that. It's fun that you point that control part out because that's definitely an element that plays into hypnosis. It's how much are you willing to trust the other person? How much control are you willing to give over to the other person over your thought process?
And in my case, that's extraordinarily little as a baseline. So, to satisfy the requirement for attempting it in good faith, I would really have to lean on having worked with and trusted this particular individual for an extended period of time, and even then, it would be difficult. So I stand by the idea that it would be difficult initially, but I should be able to overcome it if it was something I were trying in really solid good faith. Um, that's a really interesting set of questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Uh,
I think actually those are questions, frankly, Hamza, that you and I probably ought to have considered significantly earlier in the podcast when we were actually on topic. um,
uh,
this is very important. We're talking about an actual system, right? We should consider projection a little bit.
no. Yeah, we should. But MK Ultra, guys.
Okay, Hamza. What is it you wanted to get to with MK Ultra, and why did you want to go there?
Okay, so I feel like so MK Ultra, it's like the peak of hypnosis, right? Um,
Is it?
I mean, it's a questionable peak of hypnosis.
It's a questionable. Okay,
and
go on.
it's really fun because the whole purpose. So I guess so. Hypnosis, of course. Just to clarify, it's not about mind control. It's more about entering that meditative state, right? But uh, in essence, in the purest form, it is about altering one's perception of a certain element in life or a certain thing in life, right?
Let's pause for a second just so that we can get everyone up to date. MK Ultra in this case is referring to Project MK Ultra, that was jokingly called, and perhaps seriously by some called, the CIA Mind Control Project. So let's make sure that we're playing this a little bit more broadly. We don't necessarily know that the audience knows MK Ultra or anything about MK Ultra.
Oh
So if you
yeah,
would
yeah,
give a little bit of a dive in on why you want to go this way and what it is before we try to stitch it.
yeah, and I was definitely getting to that, and the purpose of MK Ultra was finding ways to make a human do things you want it to do, right? Imagine a world where your super soldier, your assassin, your hitman does exactly as you tell it to, right? That's a dangerous and scary world, yes, but that's also a world full of power and control. How could you influence the masses all at once? And that was kind of the goal set out by MK Ultra. It was a CIA-backed project, and uh, it did a bunch of, I was gonna say fun stuff, but crazy stuff, depending on your perception of it. And they were doing a whole bunch of things like would LSD influence a person's behavior or their susceptibility? Would other drugs would work? There was so much testing done. There were so many chemicals distributed to people without their knowledge, and it was a mixed bag. They didn't really find anything of notoriety or anything useful, I would say, or at least that's what the disclosed documents say. Um, but it's
Well,
it's
I suppose we'll know eventually, right? Thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. Is that
Uh,
the right act to invoke here?
yeah, it is. It is, and I believe that it's been invoked quite a bit to get information regarding it, but it doesn't guarantee that everything will be declassified.
Oh, sure.
Uh,
If there's some element that's for, actually, frustratingly, perhaps that would be one of the things that conspiracy theorists would cling to, right?
mm-hmm.
If freedom of information were utilized, and if down the line, the documents were ultimately declassified due to an expiration of the call for the classification, or however that system works,
Mm-hmm.
um, and any part remained redacted, then the conspiracy theorists would cling to that slightly redacted component to be evidence to the contrary of any idea that would dismantle it on the grounds of what was declassified. Um, so
Yeah,
it would lead to a horrible unfalsifiable loop.
and just a quick tangent. A lot of people don't realize that, Freedom of Information Act. Yes, it allows for old documents to be declassified, but if those old documents still pertain to national security as of the date they were requested, they would still come out redacted.
Right.
And a lot of people miss that, and they're like, "Oh, they're hiding something." Of course, they're hiding something, right?
It's
That's the point.
potentially still particularly applicable to modern day national security. We only want to declassify things which are not and cannot be a threat, right?
Mm-hmm. And wow, we only have 3 minutes left. But this whole
We're having too much fun, Hamza.
we are, and this whole MK Ultra thing was gonna build towards Inception.
Oh dear. Oh
uh,
dear. Well, I guess that's how should I say it? Next time. That's right. Aeroserial says, why not have that as your next topic? A part two for hypnosis.
a part two
Or
for hypnosis.
perhaps, Hamza, if you really want, we can do episode 14, MK Ultra to Inception, or
No, no,
something
see
to that effect.
that's too on the nose,
Two on the nose.
and like a lot of our listeners and viewers might realize that whenever titling does come down in my department on this podcast, and you probably realize that these titles
Absolutely.
are all over the place, and I just like subverting expectations, it's really fun, and hence why today is called the Red Giraffe. So if we do an episode 2 on this topic, it's going to be called the Red Giraffe 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Oh goodness. So we're gonna include that as part of the. Dear me. Red Giraffe 2 Electric Boogaloo, more conspiracy theories and medical inaccuracies, brought to you by Daydreaming Duality.
um, yeah, I mean, so here's the hot take. The world is a fascinating and crazy place, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, I am a man of science, and I do love scientific accuracies, but I love daydreaming about all the other possibilities that might exist. So,
Sure.
so what?
In essence, I am a damp cloth on those lofty dreams.
But it's okay, I need something to keep me cool on these hot days. Um, uh, that okay. But
Sorry, that went in a direction I didn't expect. Once again, subverting expectations, Hamza.
why am I cursed with greatness? But no,
I don't know, but use it well.
no. So yeah, do take what we say with a big pinch of salt. We are daydreaming on these topics. If you're, I would say, like, I do want to point out that we're here to expand on existing ideas, not repeat what you can go to the Wikipedia and learn about.
This is okay, real quick. You said we have to they have to take it with a pinch of salt. In light of recent super glue related gorilla glue related accidents, I feel the need to disclaim that you should not actually consume large quantities of salt or use large quantities of salt for any purpose, as a result of the advice of our shows, because actual salt is a physical substance and not the metaphor that we were referring to.
Yeah, and
Do I have to make that disclaimer? Is that actually necessary?
You should, because in ancient China, they used to eat a pound of salt to commit suicide. Fun fact.
That's horrible.
That's a. Could you imagine eating
That is
a
a
pound of
terrible
salt?
way to die.
It is. It's.
I'm getting indigestion just thinking about it.
Oh, dude, like, okay, I can't even imagine the process because, like, you've eaten a pound of salt, right? You're super.
You are legitimately dehydrating
Yeah,
everything.
that's how it works. That's how it worked. Like, you know, the water just pulled out of your body into the salt, and it's a crazy way to go. Like, you're dying with a dry mouth, super thirsty, like the most unsatisfying way to go in life.
Is that how our viewers feel after our wild tangents in this episode? I guess they'll have to find out next time.
Yeah, be sure to, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe and share with your friends. Leave a comment or a suggestion. If you're watching on Twitch, hello, folks. You're watching it live right now. And if you're listening on Spotify, thank you for listening. My name was Hamza.
I've been Chandler. It's been really exciting daydreaming with you folks today, and we do hope to catch you next time.
Good night.